Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to your weekly dose of truth tarot. This week is July 3rd to the 9th of 2026, and we're going to take a peek at what's going on. We're post full moon, so Monday, June 29th was the full moon. So this week we're going to look at what's going on with this waning moon and our energies and what can we best do to optimize this energy. So let's just spread these around and see what comes up. Here's the first card. What is this? This is talk about being on the nose. This is the moon. So the moon is all about our feminine, intuitive, and also the dark side, what is unconscious. One of the things this gets me to think of is when we are anima or animus possessed, right? And that seems to happen quite often for a lot of people, is that they get into extreme when a woman is animus possessed. It means there is a huge amount of masculine energy, and that masculine energy takes over. And this is where we get a lot of mistaken views of what the feminine is, because if a woman is filled with animus, then of course they're going to think that those qualities are feminine, and they are not. And it'll occur the same way for the masculine, except they'd be anima possessed. So they'd have all these feminine qualities and thinking that's the way a man needs to be. And this confusion is okay. You could say everyone's confused all the time about a lot of things. Yes, but if you want to live a better life and create a better society, create a better family, it's good to know what your energy is made up of. And yes, you will have varying degrees. I'm not talking about making a generalization to all humans. I'm talking about you looking and seeing, hey, this is my feminine attribute and that's masculine. If we mix it up, then we're going to run around telling everyone else, which is hugely part of animus or anima possession. I notice, I can't say that I've proven that, but in my 30 years, 40 years of doing this work, right? 2005, so 95 to 2005, 15, 25, so that's 30 years of doing this professionally and watching people, my, tens of thousands of hours of experience with people. That's not documented, but, there is a lot of experience behind it. And that experience has told me that when someone becomes anima or animus possessed, they will switch things around and their lives become more difficult. I don't care if you switch things around and your life is better, have a good time with that. One of the things that's really important that I learned very early on in energy work, when we're learning something in energy work, we need to do it specifically using the techniques to a T. So I remember, at the get go, I'd be following the techniques that my teachers would teach me or what I had read, and I learned them really, really well. And a lot of people say, no, I don't even bother with that. Like, well, if you don't bother with that, bother learning the techniques, then how can you vary them? They won't work out. And most often people would say to me, yeah, I know things don't really work out. How do you do it? For you, it seems to work out all the time, but for me, it doesn't work. And I don't have any clientele, and I don't have, yeah, because you're not following the rules, right? We can break the rules once we know the rules really well, because they're already instantiated within your consciousness. And when your consciousness knows how to use the basic rules, then you know how to break them without breaking things, if that makes sense. You can vary them. A guy can skip steps now. right? When you're learning the Silva method of mind control or mindscape or any of these techniques, you learn them, you learn how to use them, and then eventually you'll just step into mindscape. You don't have to do the entire technique. But doing that at the beginning, you're not going to operate very well. You're not going to be very successful. And there's Birdie, accentuating what we're doing here. So when it comes to the moon, think about it, the dark side. Think about, the lunacy that goes on. When we don't follow the work that we need to follow to, let's say, make a life, to establish a life, and we just jump into things thinking we know everything, you're you don't get anywhere. Things are not necessarily successful. Now, there are people who are born into certain abilities. I've seen people have that kind of Midas touch with money, but other aspects of their lives don't work out. I've seen people have really good aspects of their lives that work out in many, many ways, but let's say finance doesn't work or investment doesn't work or their health doesn't work. We always have something to contend with that is in the moon. But at the minimum, we can follow the way, because the moon is feminine. It is represented this way over and over throughout history. If we want to change that, we're just going to get confusion and things aren't going to work out as well. We know that in society, when we have lost our way, when we start thinking that everything's okay, I can do whatever we want. Well, what have we seen? The empires fall. The Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, they just fall. The Turkish Empire. The more corruption there is in the nature of things. And don't forget, there is nature. You can't just use the exceptions in nature to tell us how life will be. We have to look at nature and see how it is, even though we have these wonderful lives. So that's what the moon tells us this week. So use the moon, since we brought it up as we're in the waning moon, and it's going to go on for a bit longer. So that waning moon helps us release what we don't need. Since the moon came up, it says, well, release your lunacy, release your anima and animus, release those ideas that contradict nature, those representations that the Greeks brought. This is a Greek deck, meaning based in the Greek gods. Well, think about the Romans who copied the Greeks. Think about every single culture. I think the only culture I know that shifts things up in tarot is every deck has masculine and feminine represented a certain way, but let's say, in the Norse deck, they will have strength represented by the masculine, whereas in every other tradition, strength is represented by the feminine. Okay, there's one thing that contradicts what most people did. They have their own way of doing things, but it's not confused because it says one is doing one thing, one is doing another. But let's not forget that that we need to understand things as is in the what is going to best resonate for you and make your life better. That's what I'm trying to say, okay? So let's see, how does that look? That looks like judgment. So that tells us that we have to make the appropriate judgments. Even though there are exceptions, the exception does not make the rule. Okay, there can be exceptions, but the exception doesn't make the rule. If you look globally at the world, most cultures and histories and sagas and traditions see the moon as feminine. La lune in French. The moon is feminine. So there can be those exceptions, but it doesn't make the rule. But it's something to look at so we understand ourselves better. And that says make the appropriate judgment. And will we make our lives better if we continue in this way? And most certainly we will, as long as we don't fly too close to the sun. So what does that mean? Well, if you get on your high horse and you think you're too high and mighty and you want to reach the gods and think you know better than the gods. If you think you know better than what nature is, well, the sun will burn you. There you go. So let's let's look at this week as one in which we explore the feminine and where our lunatic ideas lie. When you're going too extreme, that's this, you're going to have that lunacy. So I would ask the universe to help me make appropriate judgments of myself so I can release with the waning moon those things that would be too. This is the masculine usually is the air, right? Because the masculine will fly too high and the feminine needs to bring it down. So here's the feminine bringing down the masculine. We need to sit between the masculine and the feminine. That's what we need to do. Be in between, make our judgments from there. Not go too high up, not go too low, and not be too like. There's also the extreme in which people say, well, there's both sides, right? This both sidism, like, that's not what this is about. This is the two sides are not doing the same thing, and that needs to be brought in. Not that the two sides have, like the feminine has a quality and the masculine does, and that's going to be canceling each other out. That's what a lot of people do. Well, there's a rationale to both sides. That leaves us in a space where we we can't see the forest for the trees, where we become apathetic, where we just and it's kind of has a boring sense, when someone says to me, which people do very often, well, they're both sides to each story. Yes, no kidding, there are both sides to each story. But they're not just both sides. There's 50 different sides, depending on who's observing. And the interesting part is to bring all of the sides together and have a greater sense. That'll be the same thing as masculine and feminine. Not both sides have a point. Like, who cares about that? I don't know. That's my view. My opinions don't necessarily mean very much, except that the only thing I care about is that we have better lives and we make a better life for ourselves, for our family, and for those around us, so our society is better. Okay? Love you all. Have a great week, and hope you enjoy that. Ciao, ciao.